Right guys, I wanted to show you, oh still got my headphone in, apologies. Wanted to show you, mic on, some seated cars. Okay, so we're going to go from seated and some slightly different options. They might seem really obvious once you see them, and it's to give you some options, like when you're in meetings, you're at work, you're at the desk, you can maybe have something on the screen while you start getting little bits of movement in. It's again same as the normal cars, the sort of thing that I say normal cars from your standing routine stuff in the morning. That this, you will try and probably try and talk yourself out of at times. I do it, but your body will love you for doing this stuff long term. And when you start to feel the benefits, I've found that, other clients have found that, when they start to work out, hang on, oh yeah, I've just done a full day of work and I did, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 intervals of doing some hip cars. And now after a month of doing that, the pinch in my hip has dissipated. They're feeling better. So then, we can start to progress it. So we're going to go through some different variations. So from seated, we start with the spine. So nothing changes in terms of your neck car. Okay, so if you've watched your morning routine work, nothing changes with the neck car. It would just bring some awareness, simplify the movement, so probably help bring some awareness to what's going on at the neck and what's going on at the torso. We're taking out a little bit of noise downstream. Okay, so a couple of rotations. And remember, this isn't necessarily a follow on. You can follow along to a couple of them, but you've probably done this stuff all before. See, as I'm moving through it, it's not this just randomly like this. It's pulling into positions that's going to give this and this a slightly novel experience. Okay, this is the difference. So it's that little bit of intent, that 20, 30%, might even be perceived less than that, effort that you put into it, that makes those little bits of change. All right, it's just that novel stimulus where we're creating a different experience for the body that it has to respond to. So one rep like this with intent each way is going to be different than, say, just a reactive, it hurts a bit here, so I just sort of do this or something like that. We can be a bit more specific, or a lot more specific. Okay, so next stuff, nothing changes. Coming down to the spine, so global spine stuff can be a really nice one to do from seated. Say when you're looking at doing this throughout the day, tiny little movements make a difference. So it doesn't have to be like a big, banana back at the desk. I'm not saying don't have little moments of just changing the position, but what you might find is you start to do your car stuff, these little moments where you I just want to change position, and you just change where you're seated, or you might go to standing. Again, you just find yourself bringing a bit more intent to it. So you might do like a half car. So you get used to doing your spinal car, and then you just, you pull yourself up into extension, and you start to just be aware of, oh, hang on, I just want to just tease out some global extension rather than just going there, and maybe just using the same hinge point you've used every time you've done that for maybe the past 10 years, for example. Okay, so you can start to, again, change your movement behavior with that bit of intent. So you might just pull up and you have a little search around, from side to side, and bring it back in and carry on. Same in flexion. Remember, flexion being a really big leverage point of creating movement change in the spine. Okay, often people are actually flexion intolerant through the lumbar spine. Okay, so telling someone not to flex, that is not sustainable. Okay, you're going to have to flex at different moments of your day, and if you're stronger there, then that becomes a movement option from which your body can then push and share load. So say if you're teasing out some flexion of the lower back from seated, you could think initially tucking your tailbone underneath, tucking at the tail, and then you start to feel the lumbar spine start to pull into a little bit of flexion. Okay, you might then try and drive it from the lowest point of your lower back, for example. So you have a little move back and forth. Remember, a little palpate here, so you can hear pelvis running off the crest. Let's call it the crest for now of your iliums from here. So pulling down, PSIS, two little knobbly bits. Work your way straight across, and then you might just come up just a little bit from there, and you start to get into the lumbar, so the lower back. Okay, where that is joining to the sacrum. All right, and then you can start to get into more of those movable segments. And you might be thinking, right, I'm just going to, right, I've located that spot. I just give myself a little palpation with the fingers to give myself a bit of feedback, and I just start to test myself. So I just start to move into a little bit of flexion, pull back into a little bit of extension. Makes sense? So you just start to feel these little wiggles back and forth for those segments. You might then just bring it upstream a little bit, then just test yourself again. So you start to just feel finger in between those bony bits you can feel. You just put your finger in the little spaces, and you just start to feel that space almost just like open and close. So you feel it like opening up as you start to flex. Feel it like closing back in as you start to extend a little bit. All right, and you can just bring some intent then to your little wiggles back and forth of the spine from this seated position. All right, so again, some options for you that you might just find yourself doing more and more and more without necessarily having to force it, because you're doing your cars, say, in the morning. You might be doing, say, a body control class in the evening. So you start to develop more awareness of the positions you're in, and you start to just formulate off the back of maybe listening to some of these rambles, doing your other classes. You start to formulate these strategies with which you just start to feed in little bits of movement. And I will repeat what I said at the top. It's that novelty which is going to help drive change. It's your intent. Like when you're sat at your desk, obviously you want to focus on our work, but regarding movement, it's like, what's the best position is going to be the next position. All right, so it's just those little bits of movement throughout the day are absolute just gold to your body. So we've had a little ramble on the spine from seated. Okay, so remember, it doesn't have to be big movements. Like tiny little movements, getting used to those little tiny adjustments you can make in position are absolute gold. We talked about cars. We talk about the pelvic car that we do. Okay, so coming downstream again, and you can think about some little hike and drops. Again, imagine there's almost like a little, like your tailbone being like you're shining a laser down onto your chair, and you're trying to just draw this tiny little circle with your pelvis. So you just start to just a couple back and forth. That then obviously is going to start to pull some movement into the hips, into the lower back. Feel like that stuff starts to respond. Shoulders, I'll quickly go wrist and elbow, same as your other cars routine, okay? And the finger stuff that we covered as well. Coming to your shoulder stuff, so say you're at the desk, for example, and this is a good opportunity to introduce capsule car stuff, which you'll hear about in other sessions as well. So your capsule car being a rotation going on deep in this joint here that we're trying to create without necessarily traveling through this global workspace. Okay, this being shoulder car, this here being a capsule car, right? So these can be a really useful tool. Say if you're at the desk and say you could go both arms at the same time, and you might go a little bit of flexion at the elbow here, and you just glide back and forth like this. You get a nice little bit of load into your shoulders. You start to feel them get a little bit warmer. You might just do this for a minute. And you might just pull the elbows back. Just pulling back and forth, creating this moment of rotation at the shoulder. Right? From there, you could extend at the elbow and you could go same again. One shoulder up. Open it up. And you just have a little explore, and again it's you giving your body that novel stimulus to drive change, which is going to make the difference. Okay, so we've covered a little bit of shoulder stuff, and that stuff you can do from just whatever position you want, as long as there's not a pinch when you're moving through it. If there is a pinch, say you start to get a pinch here, just come up short of that pinch for now. It might be a smaller movement in that range. Okay, from there, your shoulder cut. So you could go, again, if you've not got the space at your desk, you could go bent elbow and pulling through the motion exactly the same as this. But you're going to go bent elbow and pulling through that shoulder cut, again, with the same intent to try and load the shoulder up. And you might go a minute each side. If the shoulders are something you're working on, you might do that every hour at work or every half hour, up to you. Okay, a little bit of shoulder stuff. Scapular stuff, again, same as standing, so that mindfulness, that nice little bit of movement. The scapular stuff can be a nice one to pair, with your spinal stuff, purely to help bring some awareness to how this stuff is sort of sat throughout the day. Okay, so scapular stuff, same rules apply, and elbows, hands can be in sort of whatever position you want, really. You don't have to be like sort of demoed reps here and here. You could be sort of relaxed, hands by your side, and just really try and focus on, again, I know it's repetitive, but that intent of trying to move the shoulder blades on your rib cage like so. Remember, if you want stable scapulars, whatever that means, is where's that stability going to come from? With the scapula, it's going to be movement. Yeah, so you start to get the appropriate movement at the scapulars, the shoulder blades, and it can start to load the tissue required to create a strong movement of your shoulder blades and what might be referred to as, say, stability, for example. Okay, so shoulder blade stuff stays the same, and then we come down to the hips. So hip stuff from seated, again, like small movements are going to be king. So, I mean, you could lean back a little bit just to create a little bit of space at the hip. From there, externally rotate, pull down a little bit. You might just want to go here. Test this stuff a little bit more, just pick up a little bit. Flex at the knee, explore, open the hip up, just hover the foot, testing this stuff again. And then through like this whole window of movement that you could say express from your seat, and again, it doesn't have to be big movement, you might just pick, say, the heel up, keep the toes down, just to challenge this with a little bit more load, and almost just graze your shoe across the floor as you windscreen wiper back and forth. So again, a version of your capsule car coming in really handy. Remember, so your car is that full motion at the joint. The capsule car is going to be us pausing in a certain space that we can explore with the shoulder in this example, and stimulating the deep tissue of the joint, hence why you might start to feel that sort of deep burning sort of effect as you're moving through this motion, like really specifically, like deep in the joint. You can't really pinpoint it, it's like almost like all around it. Same with the hip, so you start to windscreen wiper back and forth. And again, this might be a thing that you end up just doing, right? You're like, oh, I haven't done my capsule car for 20 minutes, and I do it for 30 seconds each leg now. You might, a little break where you start with a little bit of coffee and you just groove back and forth. So you think of, again, that movement, that load for that tissue. If you're doing that at high frequency, like again, it could be once every hour, it could be once every half hour throughout your day. But one thing I would not necessarily, it's again, it's the same as like your breath work, or like actually doing a certain type of training. At first it can seem intimidating, like when am I going to fit that in? But with your car stuff, you will probably find, and other clients have felt this in the past, I felt it myself, is the more you do this stuff, you just start to feel it when you haven't moved for a while. So you've created awareness, like in terms of loading this tissue with intent. You start to create these feedback loops of, hang on, yeah, I haven't moved my hip for a while, it doesn't feel great. I know what I can do. Let's do some movement. So your capsule calf for your hip, again, be absolute gold from a seated position. You can do it nice and discreetly underneath the desk, okay? And you get a nice little pump on as well. In terms of just manipulating the load, if you wanted to, say, for example, you love your squatting, you could just make it like a little bit more flexion, maybe just use your desk to help you out, and then test it from there a little bit more. And you might feel like you're really testing it in terms of shutting this space down. As long as it's not pinching in here, it might feel like a deep, like you're loading some deep tissue and it's working hard. If you're like, oof, wow, that pinches here, back off a little bit. Same with the knee stuff. The capsule car is great. Okay, again, such a simple movement on the surface, but so good for your joints. So you can just play around with different stances from seated. Literally, is that simple. Little different degrees of adduction and abduction to load the hip a little bit differently. And what you can do is then you could think about, say, pick your toes off the floor, digging your heels into the floor a little bit, you know, like almost maybe pushing the heels down to get a little bit more bum, or pulling the heels back towards you, just to cheekily get a little bit more hamstring, and then pivoting in, actually rotating, axially, back and forth. All right, so you're pulling into the outside of the knee, inside of the knee, all right, and you start to feel that loading just switching up throughout the knee, and you can just change up little changes in degrees of how much flexing we're getting going on at the knee. So you just extend a little bit more. Perfect. All right. Yeah, that's just again examples of where your capsule cars can come in. Ankle car, same rules apply as standing. Again, you could go foot sort of like heel down on the floor and start to carve out some reps, or you could go with foot just pulls off the floor, go for some full reps. And again, trying to keep the shin as still as you can. You're not truly going to divorce rotation at the knee and movement at the ankle, but trying to stimulate the ankle as much as you can. Okay, and from seated, we could just go a little bit of close chain type stuff. So you just imagine just pushing up into the balls of your feet, like so. And you start to create maybe this motion here. So pulling through this tissue here, you feel this loading. As you pull up, ideally doing this in barefoot. You pull back down towards the floor. And you just feel, right, I'm going to try and pull my toes up off the floor. I've got a little bit of dorsiflexion, so I can get a little bit of motion here. But I try and then pull towards this tissue and try and there and towards here. Yeah, there and there. Feet might come off the floor. Toes come back down. Feel that toe off. Feel that rotation, that pull through here. Then you come back down. Heels come down. Trying to pull the top of the foot towards the shin and tilt in this way. Like so. Alright. And again, have a nice little explore. Any movement of the toes that you want to get in. Again, perfect. Even if with socks on. Pulling the big toe off the floor. Then pulling the lateral foot off the floor and pulling the big toe into the floor. Like, feet are so important in movement, and if you can, we'll go off on rambles about the feet now, but if you can get your shoes off underneath the desk, especially if they're shoes that are funneling your feet into these sorts of positions, all right, if you love to move, if you love your sport, that is going to be time well spent, because if you can start to encourage the feet to start to behave more like feet, you think that is your base, that is your interaction with the floor when you're running, walking. The better that functions, the better this receives load, the better body can start to self-organize. But that's a movement ramble for another time. I hope you've enjoyed this talk through of options that you've got from seated in terms of your CARS movements. Yeah, so again, it is like, it's almost so simple, right? The why behind these movements is really freaking deep. And again, you go into that in various sessions a little bit more, and in one-on-one work I go into it like deeper. You tend to find, once you start to discover the why behind what you're doing more and more, when like you're like flipping out, my shoulder's feeling better. I've been doing this capsule car mat for like the past 2 months at work, and my shoulders are feeling better. It's like, there we go. So it is simple on the surface. I hope it's making sense. Take that stuff for a little spin, and the idea is, once you start to get better at the skill of your cars, you are giving yourself more options to intelligently load your body throughout the day. It's not a case of you have to do it like this, you have to do it like that. We're taking stuff that might have in the past been a little bit more reactive or a bit more sort of passive type stuff, and we're adding a really good progressive skill element to it, which again, like we said, even at really low intensity, it's giving this system that is your body a novel experience to start to drive little bits of change. Little bits of change driven over long periods of time can result in profound changes in how we move. All right. That was a little bit longer than I thought it'd be. If you're still with me, cheers. Have a good one.